Hello everybody, Steve the Bread Guy here, and today I've got in my hands a lovely focaccia. I wish you could smell this. It smells just amazing. This focaccia has onions, rosemary, Italian herbs, and sun-dried tomatoes in it. It tastes just fantastic, and it's not that hard to make. It's only taken a few hours to make, and most of that time is just waiting around for the bread to rise. I've actually made two this size with this recipe, and I'll show you how in a second. Um, if this is your first time making bread, I wouldn't start with this one. I'd start with a regular white bread recipe. But if you've got a little bit of experience under your belt, this is a fantastic bread to make if you want to be popular at dinner parties. It tastes great with olive oil and balsamic vinegar, and it's really good with pasta too. So I suggest you give it a try and join me. Okay, so to get started on this, we're going to need to start the way we always do, which is with a little bit of yeast. So 2 teaspoons of yeast go into the bowl. This is instant dried yeast. Active dry is what it's called, and you can find it in all sorts of grocery stores. So 2 teaspoons of yeast, and then 2 cups of water hot enough so that when you put your finger in, it just starts to hurt, which means around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So let me just go get that. 1 and 2. And just make sure that none of the yeast is clinging to the bottom of the bowl, so give it a little bit of a stir. And now we wait for about 10 minutes until the yeast starts to froth on the top. Okay, so I'm back. It's been about 10 minutes, so let's take a look. And there's a nice scum on the top of the yeast water mixture, so that's a good sign. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. This is just regular salt. It's not that coarse salt I was talking about before. So 1, 2, and then before we get to the special ingredients, we're going to add some flour. And this recipe tends to take around 3 or 4 cups of flour in all. So this is regular white unbleached flour. There's 1. Just get a spoon so I can stir it up. So just add them one at a time. Let the water get in there. Add another one. Like that. See it's starting to thicken up like a batter, sort of like a pancake batter, and then it gets thicker than that. I call this Steve's Focaccia because really it's based on Italian focaccia, but it may not be exactly traditional. So I've taken some liberties. And one of the things I've found, which tastes really good in one of these focaccias, is to put in some herbs, some sun-dried tomatoes, and some fried onions. So I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of the herbs. That may seem like a lot, but once it's spread out through the bread, it won't taste like a lot. So just mix that up. And of course, if you're doing this in the summer, if you have fresh herbs, those would be great too. These are dried herbs because I'm still doing it just coming out of winter. And now I'm going to put in the onions. And I'm going to put in most of the onions because you can never tell exactly how many it's going to absorb, so I'm going to hold a few back. And I'm going to put in all of the sun-dried tomatoes. Just mix it up. It's starting to smell really good. Now I'm going to add up to 2 cups more flour. So I'm going to put in about half a cup to start. And this particular dough, because it's got so many things in it, it's a lumpy dough. I mean, the flour mixture is fairly smooth, but of course you're going to feel the lumps of the sun-dried tomatoes and the onions and stuff, and that's perfectly okay. And it doesn't, don't be surprised if not all the stuff you put in actually stays in. You'll see as I start to knead it. into its final stages, that stuff's going to fall out, and that's just the way it goes. I mean, it can only hold so much stuff. And this isn't a science, this is an art, so I'm not quite sure exactly how much it'll take each time. Just keep mixing that until it becomes a kind of ragged dough. Okay, I want to use my hands now, but it still needs more flour because it's still kind of wet. So I'm going to put in another half cup of flour. Just pull up my sleeves here, and now get my hands in there. And I'm just going to knead it within the bowl so we don't have to pull it out on the table and make a big mess. I try to do all of these breads in just one bowl, trying to keep the mess to a minimum. So just fold it over on itself, press down, and then do it again. Fold it over on itself, press down. And if you feel your hands getting sticky, that means the flour needs a little more, the dough needs a little more flour, so put a 1/4 cup there. Turn it over. Now I'm going to pick it up. And it's usually at this stage that stuff starts to fall out, but that's okay. You can't force it. So it's still a little bit wet, so I'm going to put it back down. Fold it over a little bit more. Nice thing about this bread is it has a really nice color. It'll go a sort of light, not pink, but it's going to have a sort of orangey red tinge to it as it bakes, thanks to the sun-dried tomatoes. Okay, and that's feeling pretty good. It's nice and elastic. As I said, it's kind of bumpy. You can see there's all sorts of things on the surface there, onions and the sun-dried tomatoes. Just one more time down there. Just cover it a little bit more with flour. Fold it over. You don't want it to be too wet on the outside, so now it's not wet at all. It's a nice elastic kind of dough. And it's not actually dropping much, which is good. Sometimes I've had it where just onions are dropping out of it left, right, and center. But this one's holding its own quite well, so I'm just going to put that to the side. Flip my sleeves. Now I'm just going to clean out the bowl. There's a little bit extra in here. If you rub your hands together over the bowl, you can get most of the stuff off. So I'm going to just dump this into the compost. Okay, 2 seconds. I'm just going to find some olive oil. Just put a couple tablespoons in there. Just rub it around the inside. You do this so that the dough won't stick to the bowl. Then just take the ball, put it in, turn it over once, turn it again. So just put it like that, keep anything from falling into it, and we'll leave it. And in about an hour, it'll be all done, and we'll come back and get ready for the next step. Okay? See you in a little bit. Okay, so I'm back. It's about an hour later, just a little bit over, and let's take a look and see how this has gone. Ah, perfect. So as you can see, it's risen really nicely. Let me just give you a shot of that. See, it's risen to about halfway up the bowl, which is perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to punch it down, and then we'll get it into the pans that it's going to bake in. So to punch it down, you literally just punch it down. You can literally punch it if you want. Turn it over a bit. Don't worry if it's a little bit oily. That's totally fine. We're actually going to add oil to this in the very last step, so it's fine if the olive oil is getting absorbed. So just knead it a little bit, squeeze out some of the carbon dioxide, which is built up as it's been rising. It smells really good. You can smell the herbs and a little bit of the onions and of course the olive oil. And I find with this, I tend to divide it into 2 pieces. This is a very filling bread, just because it's got so much stuff in it. And it's really ideal for serving as an appetizer with some olive oil and some balsamic vinegar. It can also be served with dinner with pasta. It's very good for that because it has quite a bit of taste on its own. But I like to divide it in 2, so I'm just going to twist off 2 pieces here. There we go. Doesn't matter if they're exactly the same size. So I've got 2 round balls now, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some oil in a couple of baking pans. And what I'm actually going to use are pie tins, because focaccia isn't meant to be a big puffy bread. It's supposed to be sort of flat. So I'm just going to take a couple of pie plates, put some olive oil in them, like that. So that's about a tablespoon of olive oil. Spread it around all at the edges because it will rise up. So give it nice and cover it up quite a bit, like that. And then just take each ball, just press it down so that it fits inside the pie plate. And it'll rise and get rounder over the next hour. Just press it in like that. Do the same thing with the other one. Just like that. And don't worry if it's not quite exactly round. It'll work itself out. Okay? And then that's all we're going to do for now. Now we need to let it rise for another hour. So I'm just going to wash my hands again, cover it up, and away we go. That's all there is to it. This is not a difficult recipe once you do that first step. So I'm just going to leave it now for another hour, let them rise up, and then we'll do the last stages. So I will see you in a little bit. Okay, so I'm back, and let's see how the breads have done. Let's move these things out of the way. So, the second rise is now done. The next step in doing one of these things is preheat the oven. So the oven is heating up to 400 degrees. And what we want to do now is actually make some indentations in the dough with our fingers. Just poke it with your fingers like this so that you can see some indentations. Okay. And then let it rest for a couple minutes. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a few things on top. So I'm going to add a little bit of the herbs again, just on top like that. And I'm also going to drizzle it with some olive oil. This just, you want it to get stuck in those holes. This is, ideally the crust is going to come out kind of crunchy because it's a little bit fried, and it's because of the oil that you put in. So just drizzle a little bit of oil on top, and then take, this is sea salt. It's a little bit bigger than regular salt. You know, the kind of salt which comes out of the salt shaker is of course very fine. This hasn't been crushed as much. So it's crunchy, and we put just a little bit on top, which gives it the crust a slightly salty flavor, which really makes it, frankly, a little bit addictive. So if there's sun-dried tomato parts which are sticking out of the dough, pull them off because they'll burn, and of course that won't make it very attractive. The oven is now heated, so I'm going to put them in, and as I said, I'll just put them in for about 20 minutes or so, and I'll check on them to make sure they're ready to come out. So looks really nice, and now let's put them in. Oh yeah, that turned out nicely. Take a look at that. Beautiful. You can see the salt, the white spots on there, the salt, and it's, oh, it just smells great. It really, really does. Okay, and just let me get the second one, because there are two in there. And there's the second one. And you can see the onions come to the surface a little bit. It's actually, because it's sitting on all that oil, I can actually hear it crackling. So these things have turned out really, really nicely. And when you cut into them, of course, there's all sorts of good stuff in there. The onions, the sun-dried tomatoes, and the herbs. So please give this a try. It's not hard to do. You saw the steps. None of this is rocket science. It's just a couple of extra things to do relative to a regular white bread. And it is so yummy. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you check it out. And until next time, I'm Steve the Bread Guy. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.